All right. Hello, everyone. Happy return from spring break. We are motivated, maybe a little emotional, and we know we've got personality. This is Unit 7, and we are in Module 58, which is on stress and illness. And we will also be covering Module 59, which has to do with happiness and well being. Let's get started. So this example here was in the textbook, and I felt like I wanted to share because this is an example of extreme stress. So here we are. This young man, Ben Carpenter, was crossing the road, and a semi actually didn't see him. And when it actually went to hit him, he actually became attached to the semi truck and he was being pushed down the road. You can imagine how terrifying that would be. So that was an example of extreme stress. And you, like I said, when we think of stress in our own daily lives, we'd have different levels of it. And it's also about how we look at the situation. So, what is stress? Stress is the process by which we perceive and respond to certain events called stressors that we appraise as threatening or challenging. So we want to talk about that word appraisal because we talked about it last module when referencing the theories of emotion. And Lazarus had said that we can have different emotions based on how we appraise a particular event. So obviously for Ben, and 99% of us, we would appraise that experience as extremely scary and we would be very afraid and stressed. But maybe there's somebody that does that, they are somebody that it likes to do daredevil type events. And so maybe for them, they might appraise it as not being quite as stressful. Sometimes we are going to have experiences that can actually lift us up and we might call it a challenge. And so maybe it has some level of stress, but it actually might have positive effects where it makes us more resilient or keeps us motivated. So it's not always negative. So the three main categories of stress are catastrophes, significant life changes, and daily hassles. Let's quickly go through each one of these. Catastrophes are unpredictable large scale events like earthquakes, floods, wildfires, and storms. Hopefully, you have not been part of a catastrophe that's extremely stressful. Significant life changes is where you've had something where you've moved, there's been a divorce in the family, even positive things like graduation or getting married. Those are significant life changes. So even though they're positive, they still cause a level of eustress, which is like positive stress. All right. And here's just a quick little interesting fact here that they noticed that when they surveyed 650,000 Americans during 2008 and 2009, they found that the daily stress was highest among younger adults. So the other thing we're going to talk about this thing is called daily hassles. So among young adults, they seem to be most impacted by it. I think as we get older, we kind of like, all right, this is just the daily annoyances. We need to not let it get to us. So, for example, if you wake up late, you're upset with like a teacher, you feel like there's a lot of assignments at one time, being affected by your friends' moods, those types of things. And just thinking within a stress scale, how we're responding. And we have physiological responses and psychological responses. So here's an example too. I want to keep this in here. How we actually do research. So they may actually collect saliva. Here is an example of collecting saliva before somebody is about to do a like public speaking event, which could be really stressful and cause a lot of anxiety. And they're measuring the amount of the stress hormone cortisol, and they notice that before they have a certain level, and after the event, they have a higher level of cortisol. So we definitely can make some assumptions that it is more of it is being released when you're feeling stressed or anxious. So that is one example of a physiological response. And one big thing when we're talking about stress is the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. We also call it fight or flight. And we know that you don't have to memorize all these different characteristics of the activation of the sympathetic nervous system, but definitely know increased heart rate and respiration, blood, diverts blood from digestion, which is inhibiting the digestion. And you have certain releases of hormones like adrenaline and things like that. All right, so as we mentioned, the adrenal gland is more specific to the fight or flight because it is the release of cortisol and adrenaline. And that is different than, so we have the sympathetic nervous system. We learned that, several units ago. We've talked about it several times. It is a big part of how we behave. But there is another theory by Hans Seil, and he noticed that when people are in really stressful situations, like, for example, receiving electric shock or surgery, that they go through these phases, the way that their body responds. And we're going to go through those. It's called the General Adaptation Syndrome, or GAS, not the gas you're thinking of. Phase 1 is what we call the alarm reaction. These are the 3 phases right here. We'll go to the first one. Phase 1 is the alarm stage. So that's when the event first happens. You have the stimulus, and that is activating the sympathetic nervous system. And you might even feel a little faint because your body is activating those resources that you need to respond. Phase 2 is called the resistance phase, and the body's resistance to stress can only last so long. But you will have temperature, blood pressure, and respiration remaining high, because it wasn't just for a quick second, it's remaining high. And the adrenal glands are going to pump hormones into bloodstream, and it's going to help you maintain and still be able to respond to that challenge, that stressful event. But over time, your resources dwindle. It's not going to be able to sustain for long periods of time. And that's when you can get to the phase 3, which is called exhaustion. And that is when the body becomes more vulnerable. And this is when we really talk about the negative effects of stress and how it can affect your, health. So you're vulnerable to illness, and even possibly collapse or death. They've had some examples of that in real extreme situations. And I'm actually going to pause this video. All righty. So just to go back through, let me make sure I am actually recording this. Yes, I am recording. Okay, sorry. So we're having somebody install a door, and they came to the door to install a door. So, okay, so moving on. We talked about the exhaustion phase already. So just remember, let's do a little quiz question here. Emily's family has been traumatized by a recent hurricane in Puerto Rico. According to the Hans Seil's General Adaptation Syndrome, GAS, which is the correct order of the phases the family must go through in dealing with their stress? You always get it right. I'm always so surprised. It is C, alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. So think about, like, when you've had something really stressful happen, and you think of how, like, your body became very alert, and you might not necessarily recognize the resistance phase as much, but then remember how you're just so tired later on and just exhausted. So kind of remember it that way, and it'll help you remember the 3 phases. All right. Make sure you know the difference between the fight or flight with the sympathetic nervous system and the actual general adaptation syndrome. So when talking about stress, we're going to also talk about some of these positive things and ways that we try to cope and deal with stress. There is a term, it's called tend and befriend. It is more common among women that you give and receive support as your way to maintain and deal with the stressors that are in your life. And it is helpful. We also, remember, each unit, there's special fields in psychology. There's something called health psychology that provides psychology's contributions to behavioral medicine. So they might actually work with doctors in the psychological components of, somebody that is dealing with something like cancer. There's psychoneuroimmunology, which is the studying of how psychological, neural, and endocrine processes together affect the immune system and resulting health. So a lot of this unit and what we're talking about or this particular module was stress, has been studied, and where this information we're learning has come from the psychoneuroimmunology field. How does the stress response work? Okay, so we have to think about, there is, some complexity. We're not going to go into great detail. You want to just generally know that there are cells that are trying to fight intruders that are coming in. And we know that when we get a cold, that is just basically telling us that there has been, there's a virus that has tried to invade and has invaded to a certain degree, but our body is trying to respond to it and attack it, the cells, and kill those substances. So we'll go, is it a bacterial infection? Is it a cancer virus or cancer cell? Is it another harmful intruder? Is it a disease cell? So here are just some quick examples. We have the B lymphocytes, which is going to help us deal with colds. Also, it is also the B lymphocytes are the antibodies that we have. And the T lymphocytes are going to actually attack and fight the viruses and the cancer cells. And there's macrophages, which are trying to engulf. Here you got an example of actually engulfing a very serious bacteria like tuberculosis. And then if your cell, you actually have cancer in your system, then the next phase is to bring in the NK cells, which are the natural killers that are trying to attack the cancer cells. So there's lots of cells and the antibodies in our body that are trying to fight these intruders that come, the chemicals and the substances and the viruses that come into our body. But if we are stressed, right, that actually can have the opposite effect. Let's talk about that. So when you notice that you might get more colds when you're stressed, and we always talk about our immune system goes down. So here's some examples. Surgical wounds heal more slowly in stressed people. Stressed people are more vulnerable to colds, and stress can hasten the course of a disease. So it can actually speed up the disease itself and the negative effects. Here's an example. What does the research show? When researchers dropped a cold virus into people's noses, okay, that I do not want to volunteer for that study. 40% of those living with stress-filled lives developed colds. Now, stress does not actually cause cancer, but we know that it is going to make it more difficult for the cells that are trying to fight off the cancer or fight off the viruses. They're not going to work as well. So in a healthy functioning immune system, they search out and destroy the cancer cells and cancer damaged cells. If the stress weakens the immune system, it can weaken the person's ability to fight off the cancer. Now, there is some evidence to support that, but it does not mean that just, if you have cancer and never being stressed about having cancer, that you're going to be able to get rid of the cancer. It doesn't mean that, unfortunately. All right. So they gave some, they like to work with rats, and they gave rodents stress or created stressful environments. And they noticed that the stressed rodents compared to the unstressed counterparts developed cancer more often, experienced tumor growth sooner, and grew larger tumors. We also know that it can play a part in coronary heart disease. And the more psychological trauma people experience, the more their bodies generate inflammation, which is associated with heart and other health problems. So they notice specifically that there are these two kind of general types of personalities, and these we're going to actually be talking about personality in a couple other modules. And there are other theories of personality. This one is more specific to how people respond to stress. And he put this Friedman and Rosenman, they did a longitudinal study of 3,000 healthy men, and they put them in the two main categories and basically how they dealt with stress and their body's response to it. So they have a type A and type B personalities. Type A are very reactive, competitive, hard driving, impatient, time conscious, super motivated, verbally aggressive, and easily angered. So kind of easily triggered, but very competitive, very intense, definitely motivated and try to get things done. Type B is easygoing and relaxed. All right. Now, pros and cons for each type personality when it comes to maybe how successful you might be or what you get accomplished. But when it comes to the psychological effects of stress, let's look at this. 9 years later, 257 men had suffered heart attacks, and 69% of them were type A. Moreover, not one of the pure type Bs, the most mellow and laid back of their group, had suffered a heart attack. All right. So I don't know. What's the take home advice from this? I would say we're probably all a little bit of both. You don't want to be too much type A. I mean, type B, certainly you're laid back. And I guess that's a good thing, right? So they notice that they are more prone to coronary heart disease, and that is the main thing. And it has to maybe do with the aggressive temperament. So these are a lot of the physical effects of like when you get angry and how it affects you and how it is, it obviously is a form of stress and that it is going to deplete your resources. So we're not going to go into all those details. And Harvard School of Public Health found pessimistic men doubled the risk for coronary heart disease. So there's another thing, there's something called catharsis, and they found that they used to believe that the catharsis is where you find some emotional release for what you're feeling when it comes to anger and aggression. And they used to actually believe, they thought it would help you feel better and you would not feel as angry, and maybe also help with your levels of stress and things of that sort. But in the end, what they found is it does not cleanse your rage. It actually could breed more anger. It can provoke further retaliation, and it actually could magnify the anger, which in course is going to increase your level of stress. So much better to wait when you're feeling really angry and upset about something, rather than just acting out on it and having an emotional release. It's better to wait, find a distraction or support, or distance yourself. All right. So it doesn't directly cause illness, but it makes you more vulnerable. And that was it for the stress part. Let's take a deep breath. All right. So we just talked about stress a little bit. And we are now going to talk about health and happiness. Having positive expectations, thinking optimistically. Would that be more helpful than thinking pessimistically? Well, I will say that some of the research that we have found historically, and then what we've heard about like over the last year with the pandemic, that there are times that it's important to be optimistic and to overall have a way of thinking that's positive. But I like to call it realistic optimism, because there are certainly times that we cannot deny that something negative is happening, and we don't want to ignore that. So positive expectations often motivate eventual success. So there's a general rule. We'll remember that. Pessimists expect things to go badly, And they tend to have that like hindsight bias. I knew it all along, but yet they could have been creating that own reality through their pessimism. Optimists tend to feel they have more control. So here, actually, I'm going to skip over this. So one thing we know that when it comes to dealing with stress and health, pets make a huge are a huge advantage in helping us feel calmer. And they notice that even increasing the odds of survival after a heart attack, relieving depression, lowering blood pressure, and other coronary risk factors. We already know what the benefits are and how they've been therapy for us at home this past year. Which, speaking of, that's what you're hearing in the background is Aggie snoring, and my cat is here on the bed with me. So I'm definitely getting my pet therapy. What are some ways that we can reduce stress? Aerobic exercise, relaxation, meditation, spiritual communities may help gather inner strength and lessen stress effects. And talking about it. It is important to talk about. So that's when I was talking about the realistic optimism, is that, over the past year, to try to just always be acting like, oh, everything's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. You're making too much of this pandemic. No. It's important that we talk about things when we're struggling. And so here they gave an example of 33 Holocaust survivors who spent 2 hours recalling their experiences, and many in intimate detail never before disclosed. In the weeks following, most watched a video of their recollections and showed it to family and friends. And those who were most self-disclosing had the most improved health over 14 months. So just as I mentioned, it is important to talk about things. It does help calm you. And writing about your traumas can also be important as well. So they talk about journaling. There's that balance of talking, journaling, and then using some other stress reduction. Aerobic exercise. Let's look here at this chart. So here, 10 weeks after women were in an aerobic exercise program, they had the greatest decrease in depression. So believe it or not, it helped more than some of the other things, the talking, the journaling, that actually the exercise, the aerobic exercise, seemed to have the greatest effect. So get out there and do some exercise. Exercise increases arousal, counteracting depression's low arousal state. It enables muscle relaxation, sounder sleep. I noticed for me personally that, in speaking of, after I make this video, I'm going for a run, that the days that I don't get real good exercise, I do not sleep as well. So it is like an antidepressant drug, and the neurotransmitters such as norepinephrine, serotonin, and the endorphins are all released, which are going to help you improve your mood and, to be able to have better sleep and things like that. And also can lead to new neural growth. So actually, when we talk about, our brain health as well, that it says the growth and development of nerve tissue. So get out there and get active after you finish this video as well. And relaxation techniques are good, help with headaches, hypertension, anxiety, insomnia. All right, and then all of these things, diet, exercise, and what are the relaxations techniques that you're taught? You learn to slow down, to smile at others, and laugh at yourselves. That's a really important thing. Be able to laugh at yourself. Enjoy to admit your mistakes, take time to enjoy life, to renew your religious faith. So remember, in this study, they were talking about type A's versus type B's. So here we got the type A's that are more susceptible to heart attacks, coronary heart disease. So they're learning, getting ways to teach themselves to not be so triggered, not be so angry, and these are some of the ways they did that. All right. And then if we were going to think about what were the variables in that study? We know that the independent variable is going to be whether they did the relaxation techniques or not. And then the dependent variable is going to be, overall, like, did it reduce stress, and, what is their well-being after? So during the next 3 years, those who learned to modify their lifestyle and had half as many repeat heart attacks as did the first group. That is huge. Modifying your lifestyle. And there's something else called mindfulness meditation. There is actually we have a huge program even in Montgomery County about mindfulness meditation. And, we know that it's a difficult thing to do. I know a lot of us it takes practice, a lot of practice, but even just taking that moment to just, get rid of all the distractions, have some quiet, calming music, focusing on your breathing, that all can be very helpful. So here are some examples of how to do that. I'm going to let you read through it for a moment. That was helpful for me, even as I'm making this video. Lots of benefits. Improve concentration, decision-making. I almost wanted to have classes where we would do meditation at the beginning of every class for like 2 minutes or 3 minutes. Maybe we will try it. Strengthens connections, activates brain regions, calms brain activation in emotional situations. And we have to recognize that we've noticed also when it comes to dealing with stress that we call it the faith factor. Religiously active people tend to live longer than those who are not religiously active. A curious correlation called the faith factor. So they looked at the death rates of 3,900 people living in 2 Israeli communities, religiously Orthodox and 11 non-religious collective settlements. And over the 16-year period, the ones belonging to a religious collective was associated with a strong protective effect, not effect explained by age or economic differences. The religious community members were about half as likely to have died as were their non-religious counterparts. But remember, it does not mean causation. This is a correlation. All right, longevity predictors. Attending religious services, not smoking, regular exercise. All right. This is all a little repetitive, but. So when we talk about it, as we said, it's not causation, there's correlation. So there could be other variables that possibly could be involved. So says religious involvement, healthy behaviors, less smoking and drinking, social support in the faith communities, and positive emotions, hope, optimism, and less stress, anxiety. So leads to better health. So, as I mentioned, it could be these other variables that could be involved. All right. So the last thing we're going to talk about is happiness, that specific emotion that we all love and feel like we can never get enough of, right? And what makes somebody happy? Happy people perceive the world as safer. They're more confident and decisive, and they cooperate more easily. They live healthier and more energized and satisfied lives. All right, so we want the recipe, don't we? All right, let's keep going. So this is one, there isn't a lot of terms with these 2 modules. This is an important term, could potentially be on the AP exam. It's called the feel good, do good phenomenon. And it just means that when you are feeling happy or you're recalling happy events, that you're going to be much more likely to actually do good. So to do nice things and engage in more voluntary activities to help other people. Feel good, do good phenomena. So people report feeling happier after spending money on others rather than on themselves. Young children also show more positive emotion when they give rather than receive gifts. Kidney donation leaves donors feeling good. So these are examples of things that are going to make you feel good, and then you're going to continue that cycle where you're going to do good. So even though we know that naturally you're going to be more likely to do something nice for another person when you're in a good mood, we're telling you do good first, because the do good's going to make you feel good, which is going to make you more likely to do good again, if that makes sense. All right, which of the following is an example of the feel good, do good phenomenon? All right. Nico is praised by his teacher and later volunteers to help his mother clean the garage. There you go. Feel good, do good. And there is a field, it's called positive psychology. The guy that actually founded it is Martin Seligman. I don't know if you remember him, but he was the one that did the learned helplessness study with the dogs, where they were being shocked crossing the fence in that cage, and they developed learned helplessness, where if they didn't feel like they could actually get away from the shock, they kind of just gave up even when they could get away from it. I think he felt guilty. And when he felt guilty, he created this whole new field of psychology called positive psychology. And it actually originated from humanistic psychology. Humanistic psychology didn't have a lot of research. It wasn't as scientific. So this field, positive psychology, looking at discovering and promoting the strengths and virtues that help individuals and communities thrive, is science-based. And they talk about things called subjective well-being, which is your overall feeling, like we call it the happiness factor. It's used to measure your physical and economic indicators to evaluate your quality of life. How good do you feel about your life? And sorry, I'm kind of just reading through this. Taken together, satisfaction with the past, happiness with the present, and optimism about the future define the positive psychology movement's first pillar, positive well-being. Seligman views happiness as a byproduct of a pleasant, engaged, and meaningful life. That sounds good to me. The second pillar is having positive character, which is looking at yourself as an individual and having courage and creativity and self-control and wisdom and a level of spirituality. The third pillar is having to do with how you're interacting overall with society, which is going to be looking at the communities and the cultures and positive interactions with your neighborhoods and the schools. So Martin Seligman's movement of positive psychology seeks to, best answer here, enable people to flourish. Flourish is that word, is to try to be your best self, which kind of stems from the humanist movement, but then he became more scientific. All right. So I'm going to actually skip through this a little bit because I feel like this video is getting a little long. Quick little thing here. They notice that your best moods tend to be on Fridays, Saturdays. I know that's a shocker. And today is Monday when I'm making this video, so that makes perfect sense why I'm not feeling as great today. No, I feel good. I'm feeling, actually, it increased my mood making this video. I'm just saying. All right. So this last part is talking about happiness. There's some myths out there of what we perceive, what makes us happy. Does money make us happy? Yes, it does to a certain point. if we are impoverished and we are looking for our next meal, we don't feel safe in our environment because we don't have enough money to be safe. Absolutely, that's going to cause a lot of stress. But there is a point where we almost plateau when it comes to happiness, and it doesn't matter how much money that we have. So we're going to talk about that a little further. So here, let's look at this chart. So it surely helps us to avoid certain types of pain, yet though average buying power has almost tripled since the 1950s, Americans' reported happiness has remained almost unchanged. So even though we have more material, like, we talk about material happiness, we have the opportunity to buy, and we have many more things, like material things. So for example, like cell phones, and you guys just have access to a lot more physical objects that you can buy. Our happiness has not changed. So there is a principle, it's called the relative deprivation. There's two principles, but we're going to talk about the first one. That happiness is relative to our own experience and relative to others' success. And I think it's got the name of it here. No, actually it's here. So it's called relative deprivation. And what that means is that your happiness is going to be relative to how you're seeing other people and their experiences and how successful they are versus you are. So it's like kind of like when you're comparing yourself to others. All right. So if you and this helps explain why a lot of times you think that if you just move into a bigger house, like a mansion, that you're going to be happier. But according to relative deprivation, what's going to happen is at first you're going to move into that mansion and you're like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. All right. And you have all this money, you live in this mansion. But then you're going to start comparing yourself with your mansion neighbors, all the other neighbors that have their bigger mansions, right? And then you're going to be feeling relatively deprived. You'll be like, they have a 5-car garage and I only have a 4-car garage. I feel deprived. So you may not believe that. You may think that, living in that lifestyle, you'd be happier. But the research has shown you just start to become, we call it, it's all relative. You just start to kind of compare yourself in your immediate environment. So there's one other theory. It's called the adaptation level phenomenon. And this is where, I'm going to read through the explanation, and I'll explain it. So it says, our tendency to form judgments of sounds, lights, or income relative to a neutral level defined by our prior experience. After initial surge of pleasure, improvements become our new normal, and we then require something even better to give us a boost of happiness. So what it means is that, like, let's say you decide that you have something, you win the lottery. All right. So you win the lottery, you're really excited about winning the lottery, and you're going to have a boost in your happiness, right? You might go from, like, overall you were a 6 before to like a 10 in your life satisfaction, your well-being, initially. But over time, it's going to go back probably to that 6. You're going to kind of get used to it. You're going to get used to that new environment and that new, rich lifestyle. So the opposite is true. If you have, this is some research they did, and let me see if it's on the slide, sorry. Oh, well, this is what I just talked about. Let me see if there's another. Oh, okay. All right, so sorry, I didn't read through all of these slides real quick before I made the video because I generally know the topics, but all right, so let's go back here for a minute. When you, they also did some research where they had some people that had suffered a tragedy. And let's say they were in a motorcycle accident or something, and they actually lost a limb. They had a limb amputated. Now, I know that sounds devastating. Now, you certainly know that their level of happiness, if they were like a 6 before, probably went, to a 2. And, it's extremely, it's a tragedy. And there's a lot of like suffering that may have occurred. But remember the adaptation level syndrome. What that means is the longitudinal studies and looking at resilience, that over time, most people will go back to their general level of life satisfaction. That even when they lost a limb, they go back to overall happiness over time of a 6. So we adapt, we get used to our experiences, we adjust. All right. So sorry, it was a little wordy. It's not necessarily following the slides. I already talked to you about the relative deprivation, which is right here. All right. So we'll just, here, let me read this last thing. For example, satisfaction stems less from our income than from our income rank. Better to someday make $50,000 when others make $25,000 than to make $100,000 when friends and neighbors and coworkers makes $200,000. So just meaning like, right, if you're the richest one in the neighborhood, you're going to be the happiest. Okay, I don't like Andy on that, because I think it's all about within, using those stress reduction techniques that are going to keep you happy, having a level of balance when it comes to your life and your lifestyle. I think that's going to be better than making that 200,000. Happy people have high in self-esteem, optimistic, outgoing, and agreeable, involved in close, positive, and lasting relationships, are physically attractive. Okay, yeah, they do notice that a little bit, but not overall. You can be happy without being considered at the top of attractiveness. We're going to talk about that one a little bit later. Skillful at work and leisure, active in religious faith. They exercise regularly, and they're good sleepers. All right. So take control of your time, act happy. If you act happy, it's going to make you feel happy. Work and leisure that engages your skills. So find things that you really enjoy doing. Buy shared experiences rather than things. So a lot of research shows it's much more about the experiences than the actual object. You're going to get used to that cell phone after a while. Join the movement, so aerobic exercise. Give your body the sleep it wants. Give priority to close relationships. Focus beyond yourself. So think outside of yourself. If you're too focused on yourself, that is going to overall affect your level of happiness. Count your blessings and record your gratitude, and nurture your spiritual self. And on that note, I'm going to go for a run. You do some other one of those techniques right now. Meditate, journal, go for a walk. It's 75 degrees today, although you'll probably be watching this video on another day. So hopefully it'll be good weather that day. Take care. Bye, everybody.